was awoken by my child late at night. The words he said made my blood run cold. By Angry Card Shuffler. It was a strange thing for a child to say. Of course, I wasn't as surprised as a regular parent would be. I almost laughed thinking about how some of my friends would have reacted. Not that I'd had time for them lately. They understood, of course, or they said they did. I could hear their words rattling around in my head. It's okay, our kid has been having a rough time in school too lately. I knew they had their heart in the right place, but it was hard not to be annoyed. They truly had no idea. My child has always been different, and although I love him more than anything in the world, it takes work. And no amount of therapy could even give us the tiniest glimpse into the workings of his mind. Like any new parent, I worried, but back then I was sure that things would get better. Yet the months, days, and years passed, and eventually hope turned into fear. Confusion turned into dread, and the quiet and depressing numbness set in. In a way, though, it got easier when we stopped trying to find some ultimate fix. When we began to work past the issues as they came up one by one and abandoned the child specialists and religious zealots coming to perform exorcism or other strange rituals. If you had told me as a skeptical atheist teenager that I would one day be sitting in the living room watching my son scribble horrifying images on the wall with his crayons and pick up the phone to call a man to come and perform exorcism on him, well, the point is, nothing worked. Our child just was this way. It was near 2 o'clock at night when he came into our room. We were used to this, night terrors, sleepwalking, the usual. A full night's sleep was but a distant memory for us. I was awakened by a tug in my arm. I looked at my son in his old pajamas that were too small as he stood in the center of the room. He refused to wear anything else.
"I'm sorry,"
he said, looking into my eyes.
"The grinning man made me do it."
He attributed much of his strange behavior to this grinning man. Burning things, killing small animals, carving holes in the kitchen table with a large knife. His excuse was always the same. The grinning man made me do it. This time seemed different, however. Maybe it was the way he stood or the slight quiver in his voice, but whatever it was, it scared me in a way he never had before. I stood up and tried to put it out of my mind. He was having another episode. There was no need to wake up his mom. I could take him down to his room. I stood up cautiously and got out of bed. "Come on, buddy. Let's get you back to bed," I said, putting my hand on his upper back and guiding him toward the door.
"I'm sorry,"
he said again, and I saw tears building up in his eyes. Hey, everything's fine," I said as I reached down to lift him up.
"No,"
he said, pulling away.
"I need Mom too. Well..."
He stumbled over his words, looking down at the ground.
"He said he needs both of you."
I stopped for a moment, needing to reassure myself that nothing he said mattered. He often had hallucinations of horrible creatures slithering out of the cracks in the ceiling, stalking the halls of the house or crouching atop bookshelves. The way he described these monsters with such immense and nauseating detail was enough to scare all of the other children in his kindergarten class. The grinning man was just another one of these. Hallucinations. That was all. Nothing more. I leaned down and scooped him up. "Come on, let's go back to bed." He didn't protest, but I saw a worried look on his face as he wrapped his arms around my neck and looked back to where his mother was sleeping in the bed. We walked down the hall and stopped at the top of the stairs. His bedroom was down at the bottom as per my wife's decision. She thought it would help to prevent him from falling down the stairs and hurting himself while sleepwalking. It didn't really matter though. He could get up and down the stairs in his sleeping or waking life. Nevertheless, I had agreed. If it made no difference, there was no need for me to argue. We had enough arguments lately. It was incredibly dark. I had to rely on muscle memory alone to navigate me through the house. There were no windows in the upstairs hallway to let in even the slightest bit of comforting moonlight. I stared down the stairs. It seemed as though I was looking into an endless abyss of nothingness. I took the first step down into the unknown. He seemed to cling closer to me with every step that we took. His nails dug into my skin and he buried his face into my neck.
I didn't want to, but he made me,"
he said into my ear. "It's okay, kid. There's nothing to worry about," I said, half to him and half to myself.
"Yes, there is. You never see him because he hides in the closet. That's where he lives. He wears a big heavy coat so you don't notice him. But when you leave the room and it's just me and him, he comes out and crawls along the walls. His fingernails are too long. I don't like the clacking sound that they make, or the feeling of them scraping against my skin.
I wish that he would stop. I began to sweat heavily, and I could feel my heart beating faster and faster. I said nothing, though. What could I say?
He's always smiling. He never seems happy, though. And I don't like the way his eyes dart around the room.
There was a door at the bottom of the stairs. It made the space seem small and claustrophobic. I would have bumped into it. I usually did, but I had a certain awareness that night and was cautious of the door several steps before. The door was kept locked during the day after an incident in which he had wandered off and dangled himself out the second-story bathroom window. It gave us a panic attack, and we deemed the upstairs unsafe for him. From that day forth, he wasn't allowed upstairs without direct supervision from one of us. During the night, however, the door was left unlocked. After a heated argument between my wife and I that I eventually gave up on, I was called a monster for thinking that he should be kept away at night, and we came upon the agreement that the door would remain closed but not locked. This was in case he really needed to get to us. Maybe I was just trying to protect us, or maybe I was being cruel to our child. I don't even know. I just thought that it might make us all safer for there to be some distance between us and him. After all, he had said that he couldn't sleep when we were too close to him. Another thing I was never able to understand about him. I sat him down on the last step. He sat down and dragged his fingers through the beige carpet. I felt around on the rough wood until my hand touched the doorknob. I twisted and pushed, expecting the door to swing outward. Nothing. I twisted the doorknob again and shook it up and down. Nothing. I must have mistakenly locked the door on my way up to bed yesterday evening, I thought to myself. A simple mistake. I reached up for the key on the shelf and felt around. Just as my hand touched the hard metal of the old key, a thought occurred to me. A thought that made my heart drop into my stomach. I looked down at my child, who had been staring up at me. My mouth went dry and I struggled to get any words out. How did you get up the stairs? No response. How did you get up the stairs? I repeated.
He carried me.
What?
The grinning man. He carried me up here.
My heart beat faster and my breathing bordered on hyperventilation. I took a moment to calm myself. I was being ridiculous. The door must have locked on its own when he closed it behind him. It was an old house. That wouldn't be unheard of. I fumbled around with the key and shoved it into the lock. I paused for a moment. Then with both hands I turned until I heard the familiar clunk of the deadbolt sliding away. I opened the door and grabbed his hand. I reached for the light switch. I wasn't sure why I had been doing this all in the dark. Just as I was about to flick the switch, I heard a voice from beside me. I knew it was my child's voice, but at the same time it was different.
Don't turn on the light. It will make him angry.
I could only stand there. It was as if some invisible force was holding my body in place. Every ounce of reason in me told me that I should turn on the light, but we stayed in the darkness. What had I become? I was being controlled by the stories and fantasies of a 6-year-old child. All of these thoughts swirled through my head, but the darkness remained. I felt the small hand I was holding pull me towards the hallway. I let him take me. He guided me through the dark down the hall leading to his bedroom, but we stopped sooner than I had expected us to. I tried to speak, but only a faint rasp came out. The little hands grasped at me and turned my body around to face the wall. The door to the closet loomed in front of me. The door opened slowly without needing to be touched by either of us. Although he didn't have enough strength to fully move my adult body, I found myself unable to resist the persistent push of his hand against my back as much as I tried to move away. Closer and closer to the darkness and whatever was beyond. For the first time in my life, I tried to pray, but I didn't know what to pray for. Whatever had taken control of our life was no being from any of the teachings of any religions I had heard about. This was something much darker. As I was engulfed by the darkness and fell into the closet along with all of the coats and sweaters, I attempted to cry out but was unable to speak. I clung to the jacket I was leaning against and tightly shut my eyes.
I'm sorry.
A faint voice called to me. I felt movement behind me, and the horrifying sensation of long fingernails dragging across my arm.
Really, I'm sorry.
And then the door closed.